stream. It's connecting.
Yep, I just got the little notification.
Okay, and I believe we are live. All right, so apologies for that introduction, just a bit of technology. We're just trying to kickstart, but I do believe we are live. Welcome, one and all. 2022. Hard to imagine, isn't it? Just feels like it was 2020 just yesterday. But yes, I hope all you guys are well and safe, and particularly here in Sydney, keeping dry. It is a bit miserable out there, but I do understand we might have a few guests from Queensland, so I hope you're enjoying the sunshine where we're not. So yes, 2022, we are back with the Sydney Saxophone Network Q&A sessions. I do apologise for last year's lack of contact with the lockdown and all that stuff. It was a little bit chaotic, and but yeah, look, hopefully this year's going to be heaps better, and we're going to try and stick to a regular monthly program this year. So fingers crossed for that. But as I said, it's sort of a bit of a voluntary pet project, so yeah, don't hold me to that. But anyway, I don't want to bore you too much. So to start off 2022's Q&A sessions, we have a very distinguished guest all the way up north, north of the border, in fact, from Queensland. And this is a good friend of ours, Dr. Emma Demarco. Now, just a little bit about Dr. Demarco. Her bio is humongous because she's done so many things, but I'll just try and condense it into a very quick 1-minute blurb. Dr. Demarco is a Dario artist. She is an Australian contemporary musician, educator, artistic director, photographer, and entrepreneur. So she has a lot of hats in various different fields. She holds a PhD and a Bachelor in Advanced Performance with first-class honours, awarded the Churchill Fellowship, which enabled her to travel overseas to study practices of contemporary saxophone music. As a performer, she works a lot throughout Brisbane, such as with QSO. She is a founding member of the acclaimed chamber ensemble Borrega Saxophone Quartet, and they tend to do a lot of different things, which we're going to be talking about as well. And she is also a fantastic educator who is currently head of Woodwind and community programs at the Grace Academy. But yes, I don't want to spoil too much because that's basically what we're going to be talking about today. Now, just before I throw it over to Dr. Demarco, I'd just like to let all the viewers know that if you do have any comments or questions that you'd like to throw, please feel free to type those in the YouTube chat. And I will read them out as we go along. So here we go. So anyway, I'd like to introduce Dr. Emma Demarco. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited to do this. I love all these sorts of online events, and I'm always consuming them and consuming online content. So I'm really excited to be able to do this today. It's going to be great.
Excellent. No. Oops, sorry, a bit of a glitch there. But anyway, look, happy to have you, and it's very nice to have a friendly face to kickstart the year, of course. So just to sort of get the ball rolling, start with an easy one. What made you pick the saxophone?
Okay, so this is actually a story that my family love to tell. So my mother is a strings teacher and a violinist, and she started me on violin when I was in grade 2. And apparently I was quite good. I have told this story on the Two Set Violin channel, and anyway, it's a bit hilarious now, but at the time it wasn't. I would cry all the way to my violin lesson, all the way through my violin lesson. Whenever she made me practice, it was just like tears. Like I could not stand the violin at all. And apparently I asked for the saxophone. Like one day after about a year, my mum just gave up and was like, I want you to play a musical instrument. What does it need to be? And, through tears, I was like, I want to play the saxophone. But I was still a bit too small. So I had to wait till grade 4 in school. And look, I think part of it was a little bit of the Lisa Simpson influence, being a vegetarian girl, playing the saxophone, it was like a little bit of an influence there, but something about the instrument just really spoke to me. And yeah, when I was in grade 4 at school, I got my first alto, and I loved it so much. I got private lessons straight away, like just absolutely ran with it. It was just my thing, and it just has stayed, my thing. It's part of my identity now. I couldn't separate it from myself anymore.
Cool. All right. Yeah, well, obviously, saxophone is a passion of mine as well, and I can totally relate to a lot of those things as well. Now, would you mind telling us a little bit about your student days on the saxophone? So things like, who were some of the teachers that you studied off, maybe the early sort of formative years up through university, and whereabouts you ended up studying?
Yeah. So I was really fortunate to have the same private teacher all the way through school, Robin Rosewarne, who was an incredible influence on me. And she basically got me to a really high standard by year 12. I was playing at about an Elmas level and really loving it. She also, did up to grade 6 Amy B theory with me and grade 5 Amy B clarinet, all in that like hour lesson. So she just really pushed me, and that was exactly what I needed. So then when I decided I was going to do the Bachelor of Music, because it was a little bit of a toss-up. I have a lot of lawyers in my family. So I thought, maybe do I go the real job route or do I go into music? So when I decided to do a Bachelor of Music, I was really happy with the Queensland Conservatorium, like as an option, that it was local, and Barry Bobart was the main teacher there. And he is probably the number one reason why I have a music career to date. His influence cannot be measured, not just as a saxophone teacher, but just as a musical educator as a whole. So he had a really big focus on kind of, I would say maybe more of a mentor than a teacher. Yes, of course, we were doing the nitty gritty and he was picking on all my altissimo and my bad runs and all of that. But, he used to say to me, like, if you finish your lessons with me, if you finish your undergrad and you sound like me, I haven't done the right job. I haven't gotten it right. Like, I'm here to make you the best version of you. I'm not here to make you the next Barry Bobart and to make you sound like me. And I found that really interesting because, at the same time in my undergrad, I was having lessons with whoever I could, taking opportunities like to be in Melbourne and have lessons with Barry Cockcroft. I remember when Continuum Sax came up to Brisbane one year and I had lessons with like all 4 players, just absolutely absorbing every opportunity I could. And it was just really refreshing, and also traveling overseas. And it was really refreshing for Barry to be like, I am going to try and mold you into who you should, who you are meant to be. And that was life-changing. And that's how I teach now. I don't recommend the same mouthpiece because I play this, so you should play this, So Barry was amazing. And I spent a lot of time also during my undergrad traveling. So going overseas, like I said, I was just trying to absorb lessons with everyone that I could. So I'd go to the, I forget the formal name. I always just call it GAP, but it's the amazing. So yeah, I think
it's
right.
It's the European Summer Saxophone School, I believe.
Yeah, I have no idea what the formal name is. I've been to it twice.
But yes, GAP is what it's affectionately known as. So yeah.
Yeah, of course, because it's just an amazing summer school experience. So obviously lots of lessons and things there, which were really life-changing. So that was my Bachelor of Music, and I was pretty convinced after my Bachelor that I was just going to pack up and I was going to move to France and, I don't know, just be on the French scene somehow, study with someone. I didn't really have a fleshed out plan. I also should add, actually, in my 4th year of my undergrad, I did also start having some lessons with Diana Tolmie. So I'd have a lesson every week with Barry and a lesson with Diana like every fortnight or every 3 weeks. And I started some research as well. So I did an honors research project. And it was through that I fell in love with research. And I actually decided to stay in Australia and pursue a PhD, and went straight through that. So pretty much from 18 to 25, I was just studying nonstop, having lessons. But I also started gigging at 21, professionally on the international scene. So it was kind of this, like 18 to 25 is just this blur where I feel like everyone else around me got all this life experience and I was just in this little cocoon of saxophone, and just came out at 25 and was like, oh, like crap, like, okay, cool, I've got to like get my life together. Because all I've done is like play saxophone and study saxophone and write about saxophone. And it was an absolute whirlwind, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't think I could have gone back for a doctoral degree. I think I was in like a really great flow. And so by just pushing through it got me to a really good place and furthered my education more than I ever could have asked for.
Cool. That's fantastic. And yeah, it sounds like you've had a wealth of educational experiences and different perspective on saxophone playing and music and all that stuff. So it's fantastic. Yeah. So I do apologize. We are having a couple of technical difficulties. So I am kind of doing a bit of the DJ sort of thing as we progress. Yeah. So apologies for those who are watching at the moment. Just to repeat earlier, if you do have any questions for Emma, please feel free to put those in the YouTube chat, and I can read those out as we go along. But anyway, let's continue on. So the other question is, we talked about, we touched on very briefly how you were a recipient of the Churchill Fellowship and GAP and things like that, and the additional studies overseas, and with GAP and all those things, there's got to be some phenomenal teachers that you would have come across during your overseas studies. Any particular highlights that you can recall?
Oh my gosh, all the highlights. When Vincent David made me cry in my lesson.
I believe he does that to most people, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like a rite of passage almost. It's really hard to pick people out, because I think that my approach has always been to just be a sponge and to absorb absolutely everything from every experience, but particularly from lessons. I will say that Damien Royanet absolutely transformed my lower saxophone playing, particularly my baritone playing. I had lessons with him. I think it was in third year uni when I was over in France, and it was part of GAP. And then I, had more lessons because I was really quite inspired. And he completely revolutionized how I understood my embouchure on the baritone, which was really, really fascinating, because I hadn't, I'd played baritone, I'd done it, but I really was only doing alto and soprano for my recitals and only playing soprano in my quartet. So I was neglecting the lower saxophones at that point. And I think what really stood out about him too was the way that he approached, particularly with Barry. He was like, no, I'm not telling you, I guess I would, so many ideas in my head. I'm trying to get them all out in a logical order.
That's right.
So I think with Damien, the thing that I took from his lessons was, in the first couple, I thought he was trying to tell me to have a completely different embouchure for baritone. And that's what I thought he was coming across. I thought he was really trying to reshape what I was doing on baritone. And then as the lessons went on, it was kind of like that same idea that I got from Barry. It was like, no, I'm not trying to tell you to do something completely different. What I'm getting you to look at is how your anatomy actually works on that larger mouthpiece. And the fact that the larger mouthpiece has different requirements, and you've got, this different thing. And looking at, he was probably one of the first teachers that ever mentioned the shape of my lips, the fact that I have a smaller top lip and a bigger bottom lip, and what could that specifically mean, rather than just talking about the lips in general. So he really stood out. Masataka Hirano really stood out. My lessons with him at GAP were quite hilarious, because he spoke Japanese and French, and I spoke English and very broken French. I'd taken this second language course at the University of Queensland for 6 months before going to GAP, but I hadn't really picked up enough. So a friend of mine, an American student who was there, who was fluent in French, would sort of translate the bits that I wasn't getting. And I just remember him just screaming at me in French. And I was about to burst. I thought I was doing everything wrong. Actually, he was very happy. He was fine. He was like, yeah, you're doing great. This is so good. I'm loving it. And I just panicked, because he was just screaming at me, but he was just really pumped. And so that was, that's just a memory that is burned in my head, of thinking I was disappointing, one of the most amazing Japanese saxophone players ever. Oh my gosh. I think with all these experiences, I've had with GAP, lessons with Arno Bornkamp, Christian Wirth. As part of GAP, you could pick your afternoon activity, which could be taking part in a saxophone ensemble or a quartet, or I think the third option was sound painting. And I always chose the quartet, obviously having that connection to Borrega, because we started as a student ensemble that translated into a professional group. And I remember some of our work with the Habanera quartet. a just mind-blowing understanding of the different roles of the group. And I think that when you work with some of these musicians that are so established, that have such amazing ideas, but are also fantastic educators, because that's not also the case. And I'm a kind person, I'm not going to name and shame, but I have had some lessons with people that are outstanding saxophonists, where I walked away and I was like, I don't know what I learned from that experience. I don't know what I can take away to improve my playing. But that was not my experience at Gap, and particularly with Habanera and Christian. I felt like by taking part in those lessons, I suddenly had all of this knowledge and ideas that I could take back to Australia, and I could take back to my everyday practice, that, you know, that it's inspiring. That's why we become musicians, is to share this information and to share these ideas and to get that little spark that just literally sets your whole body on fire. Like, that's why we do all of this. So yeah, so that's just a few. I mean, I cried in many lessons. I'm just a crier. When I get stressed, the tears just come, and I'll still do the work and I'll be fine. But yeah, I've cried in many lessons with international saxophone players. So that's my legacy.
But yeah, it just shows you're very passionate about the music and what you're doing, which is great. And Habanera, I could certainly attest to that. We were there a few years before you were, I think, or even a year.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. But yeah, we got to work as a quartet with Habanera as well, and it was just, yeah, I could attest to the mind blowing experience working with those guys, even in a short amount of time. Okay, so here's something a little bit more. It could be a tricky one, but you know, it may not be. During all the years of study that you've done, what are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learnt, which have helped you to develop into the musician that you are today?
Okay, so again, this question just sends my mind racing in so many directions. I think one of the most valuable lessons I learned, I think, at the start of this journey, you know, if we're counting like undergrad, you know, 18 years old, okay, I'm making that commitment to go into the music industry. If that's the starting point. I think that one of the most important lessons I learned was that you need to have a huge contextual knowledge behind you. You need to understand, for every piece of music you play, about the composer, about the era that it's written in, not just, oh, this piece was written in this year. What was going on in the world in that year? What was going on in the circumstances that the composer wrote it? It's something that I think about a lot now, even working with modern music and working with commissions specifically for me. What is the composer's point of view? A good example of this is my work with the composer Kathy Lakuta, who is very motivated by story and storytelling and influences from her own life, where I then, you know, I need to know all of that as a performer. But for every single piece that I do, I want to have a really, really good general knowledge background, a really good contextual understanding of the piece that I'm playing, because that's your starting point. That, to me, that is the starting point, that if you haven't done that background work, if you don't understand where that piece is coming from, or, you know, as a saxophone player, we think about how our great concertos, all the music written, for example, Sigurd Rascher. I have plenty of students every year that come to me for a lesson or two before doing their university auditions that don't know who he is, but are playing a piece of music that was commissioned for him. And that confuses me, because it's like, well, how can you accurately even start learning that piece if you don't understand the context of his style and what he did for the saxophone as a soloist? Because if it's written for that person, then, well, what characteristics were put into that piece? Where's the composer's ideas? The composer's style, and where's his style? And where are the recordings that you've listened to understand, okay, well, this is how he did it, but then this is how a more modern, you know, where's your understanding of what's going on? So that was my first big lesson that I think I took away, is just keep unpacking, keep digging, keep learning around the piece, because then you can put your own spin on it. Because for starters, how can you say if it's your own spin if you don't know what other people have done or what the intention was? And two, how can you be, I think, respectful to the composer's intentions with your interpretation if you don't know what their intentions were? So I think that's something that is really important to me, but it's something that I try and really impart in all my students. And I'm talking like even really young students. I had a student this year who, how old is he? He was in grade 6 at school. So what's that, like 11 or 12? And he was doing Botz's aria. And so we talked about, well, who is Botzer? One, so he stopped saying Bozza. That was very cute. We stopped that.
Or in Australia, Booze is another one as well.
That's right. Look, I can't judge because when I was 16, I called him Darius Milhaud when I was playing Scaramouche at a competition. So I don't judge. But, I did a lot of work even at that age to go, okay, let's understand what this piece is, because it's just so important, so fundamental. So that's my sort of big number one. I think the other thing that I took from having lessons with all these people is it kind of made me, in a way, and I don't mean this like in the American sense of the word, but a little bit patriotic, in that what I was doing as an Australian player felt very important in a way. It felt like I was going overseas and I was meeting English players and Scottish players and Dutch players and American players and French players and players from all around the world that all have these really clear styles. And there's these schools that have emerged. We can see really clearly that there is a French school. We can see really clearly there's an American school, there's a Dutch school. There's these schools of saxophone playing. But would you say there's an Australian school of saxophone playing? I don't know if it's really there yet. I think we're in the development of it now. And that's something I talked about in my PhD research, but it came up a lot because I'd go to lessons with people and they knew I was Australian, like the accent's very obvious. But playing wise, they couldn't pick it. If they just heard me play, oh, you sound a little bit, that was a bit French, in that, oh, but that's a bit American. I was this weird hybrid child that from my playing, they found very odd. And I think that was something that I learned was like, well, as an Australian player, I have to just keep forging the path essentially and working with Australian composers and Australian perspectives and making sure that if we are in this kind of growing melting pot of an Australian saxophone school, well, what could I do to help to contribute? So that's something that I learned along the way that, again, like then I passed down and I'm like, okay, like if you're doing a saxophone degree, like where are you making friends with the composition department to get new music written? Like let's keep this going. Let's keep the ball rolling. So they're probably my top two, I think.
Okay.
But I mean, I could do like 10 more.
Well, I'm sure we can probably touch base on those later on because there's plenty more questions to go. Now, just sorry to interrupt, but I do apologise to everyone about the technical issues. YouTube Live is a bit new for me, so and I'm not a technical wizard, so we did get it working, but the link is wrong. But I have updated it, and I do understand our friends from Melbourne have joined us, and we do have a question all the way from down in Melbourne from our friend Nessia. Hello, Nessia. Hope you're well. She has two questions for you regarding your experiences studying in Queensland. So the first question is, in your experience studying in Queensland, obviously, did you mostly play one particular member of the saxophone family? Did you specialise in soprano, alto, tenor, or baritone, or did you play a bit of everything?
I think the first 2 years I was really only doing soprano and alto. And if I didn't have the quartet, I probably only would have done alto, to be honest. The quartet and like choosing to be the soprano player for the quartet really solidified that. Once I got into third year and was, nearing the end of that degree, I was like, okay, I need to kick this up a notch and I need to make sure I'm actually well-rounded on all my instruments. And I think it was around that time too. I remember it was Diana told me would do like the orchestra placements for all of us. And there was one year, which I'm pretty sure was my third year, but it might have been my fourth, but I was pretty sure it was my third year, where she was like, okay, I am rotating you guys like all the way around. And remember there was one concert we did for like our wind orchestra where I was on Barry for one piece and alto for something else. Like, she really made sure like we were moving around the place. And that actually came at the perfect time for me to get, like I was having those lessons with Damien when I was overseas. And so it really pushed me to make sure I was well-rounded. That being said, I could have done it from the start. I was sort of, I was comfortable on alto. So when you're choosing your recital repertoire, I was always leaning towards alto. And then I learned my lesson and fixed that.
Nice. And she did have a part two to that as well. Did your teachers encourage playing any particular saxophone over another?
Oh, um, I don't think so. I don't think I ever had someone say like, you have to do this saxophone. I think that particularly with Barry, he was very much a like, I'll teach you where you are sort of thing. So if I was coming in and going, hey, I just found this tenor piece, he'd be like, great, let's do it. Or if I was going, I want to do an all alto recital, he was fine with that. Because that wasn't necessarily his style to teach a very prescriptive curriculum, so to speak. But then when I was going overseas and having other opportunities, it was, like at Gap or things would be like, oh, hey, can I just chuck you a tenor? And, it's like, well, I have to be comfortable. I have to be able to be in any situation. And that's when I was thinking about jobs and thinking about positions. And it was like, hang on, I actually in Australia need to be very fluent as a saxophone soloist. If that's what I want to be, I need to be fluent on all four saxophones. And if I want any sort of education position, which I knew I wanted because one, I really enjoyed teaching, and two, I knew I wanted to buy a house as soon as possible, and I needed steady income. I was seeing friends that on other instruments that were doing like $50,000 worth of work in 2 months, and then no money coming in for 2 months, and my anxiety could not handle that. So I was like, okay, well, how do I be the best educator then? And so it's like, well, actually, you need to play all the woodwinds. And so it's like, okay, well, I've got clarinet and flute. Let's get some rudimentary oboe and bassoon. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, I still know. Look, I mean, I can teach beginner bassoon. It's by far my worst woodwind. But again, it was enough because in a lot of positions, you might have to do some beginner work, but then those students would be handed off to a specialist. No one's expecting a woodwind specialist that's, Amy B grade 8 on all their woodwinds. So I don't know necessarily. I don't know. I think if I'd done it all again, I definitely would have been way more well-rounded on my saxophones from the very start and would have pushed that myself. And I definitely would encourage that to younger players.
Okay, cool. No, I think that answers it. So, Nessie, I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah.
And anyone else who is watching, feel free to chuck any other questions you might have in the chat, in the YouTube chat, and I'll read it out as we go. But let's move on. I'd love to actually, because you seem to be a very broad-minded musician in terms of things of sort of things you're into in terms of playing and things that you different style, shall we say? And I was kind of asking, what is sort of your current major influences musically?
Oh, okay. I think that's a really interesting one because I've been on this journey since 2018 of composing for myself. And I think that's been a roller coaster and a half. I've never had any composition training. I went through some crazy life things all in 2018, and then I was on my Churchill Fellowship, and I was actually in New York and was like, you know what, I just want to try and turn, like I was in my hotel room, like I'm going to try and turn this into improvisation. And I remembered Barry Cockcroft once said that a lot of his pieces started as an improvisation. So it felt like it gave me some legitimacy. So that journey has really changed my influences in the way I approach music. And funnily enough, I would definitely say that my biggest influences in what I play and do at the moment are probably some of the composers I work with. And my top three actually would be Andrew Ball, who is an amazing saxophonist. And, I've been Brega, we're founding members of Brega together, and brilliant composer. Tom Green, who I have worked with before, who also wrote a concerto for Di Tolmie, who's written some of the most inspiring chamber works around. And then Kathy Lakuta, who I've worked with really closely, who's also a pianist. So we were able to play her saxophone and piano music together. So those influences have really changed the way I approach repertoire. And so when I was writing, I was looking at what they were choosing to write because they've all written pieces for me. So after I kind of got through this improvisatory style of composing and writing for myself, I started to look at what they chose for me. And I noticed that, I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing or a personality test, but all three of them were choosing fast, flourishy, up and down the range, loud, very like bright ideas for me. And again, I don't know what that says about my personality, but then it got me thinking, well, if that's what they're writing for me, they're writing this knowing I'm going to play it and they're going to think that's what sounds good, what can I write that's like that and sounds good? And so at the start of 2020, I had an hour of music that I wrote for myself and had some accompanying photographs, and that was called Blood Red. And that was a project that stemmed out of that 2018 time. I had some composition lessons while I was on my Churchill. And then, like I said, I went through this process of those influences. And then I had a preview performance scheduled. I think it was like April 2020, which did not happen.
That was not a good month.
No, it did not happen. It just, everything 2020 blew up all my plans. I'm someone that's had a 5-year plan since I was like 14. And I just it gets revised and it gets changed, but I'm on a path I set for myself. And 2020 just blew up that path, particularly for my performance career. I had a lot of teaching through that time and I had other work, but my performance schedule was I was going to premiere that, do some previews, really small, get some feedback because, I hadn't really played my compositions publicly yet. And then I was going to do a national tour in late 2020, early 2021. None of that happened. None of it's happened. And in the meantime, I ended up enrolling when, things were breaking down. I ended up smashing out an 18-month Masters of Teaching degree.
Oh, wow.
So that's a long story in itself, but as an educator, I didn't actually have any formal qualification in education. And so that was a degree that I did online while also teaching full-time through that brunt of the pandemic. So that was, that started March 2020 and then finished in June 2021. That feels like a blur in itself because I did a completely online uni course and didn't have a graduation or anything. So, that just changed the trajectory of everything. So what I'm looking at now coming out of it is 2021 was the year where I was really building up skill and really particularly building up skill in tech and online platforms so that this year I can do a series of online events and, kind of premiere these compositions and get back on my 5-year plan. It's different now. It's very different, but that's something that I really want to do is premiere those compositions and share that. But as part of that, it's really, as part of going through essentially 2020, everything was cancelled. I had QSO contracts, I had solo performances, I had a whole, the whole gamut of what we do was essentially wiped off the slate. And that was really challenging for my identity. So now that I've come out of it and I've sort of had last year as this upskilling year and this year to just work on some things, now I'm coming out of it and it's okay, I'm a completely different musician than I was when this pandemic started. And that's okay. And that's probably a good thing, to be honest, but it's still very frustrating. I still have a little bit of resentment towards COVID.
Yeah, I think most of us professional musicians are certainly, just musicians all around, and everyone, full stop, has got a lot of resentment against COVID. It's certainly changed the direction for a lot of people and a lot of lives. So, it'd be interesting to see how it sort of pans out, shall we say. Cool. All right, that's awesome. And I would love to chat a little bit more about your performance career and the composition side of things as well. But before we do, we have a very pressing question.
Oh, okay.
What is your current gear that you use? It is a saxophone chat, and it's one of those questions that I think everyone's very, they don't want to admit it, but it's one of those questions people like, what are you playing on, or, what kind of reed and mouthpiece? So just to, satisfy the curiosity of all the punters, what is your current setup that you're using on your saxophones?
Look, you would be the only person in the world that I would actually answer this question for, because you're the gearhead that I know. Of all the saxophone players that I've talked to you with, you're yeah, I've got this. I remember once you said you had something 100 mouthpieces. Now, we're at the pub, so maybe it was a bit of a hyperbole, but
No, it's probably 70, but I have cold, so you'd be pleased to know I'm actually, getting better.
I just see that just makes me think of, okay, so I had a lesson with Claude DeLong once where he had a read on, like, he's playing and he's like, oh, I don't like this. And so he took the whole mouthpiece off, got a new mouthpiece out of his case and put the same reed. And he's like, oh, if it sounds bad, change the mouthpiece, not the reed.
Wow.
I can't do that. I'm sorry. I'm like 19 and earning $10 an hour at Smiggle. I cannot afford this. Okay, gear, yes. Look, I'm not a massive gearhead. I think, like I said, I think that's Barry's influence of focusing on what works for you rather than works for others. But I do get tempted, and I've made a few like TikToks and things about this because I do get tempted from time to time when I'm at a conference or something and someone sounds really good. So I'll start with alto. So I'm on a Selma Series 3. I've had it since I was 16 years old. It is absolutely beautiful. It's probably due for a bit of an overhaul, if I'm being honest, but it's good. It's a good instrument. I've got the D'Addario Reserve classical mouthpiece on at the moment. So that's something that came to me as part of my role as an endorsed artist with D'Addario. I was in the States, and Kristen, who was the amazing rep over there, who was just doing brilliant things, she was like, yep, here, check this out. And I've just run with it ever since. I alternate between a 2.5 to a 3+, so 2.5, 3, or 3+, depending on the day, D'Addario Reserve reed. And then I have a BG leather ligature on there. So that's just a really comfortable alto setup for me. On soprano, I have a Series 3 Selma. It's actually a solid silver soprano. So this was just the most gorgeous instrument that a friend of mine, who was a very talented saxophone player, we went through undergrad together. He finished his undergrad and went, I never want to play music again. And that's a whole other interesting story about his experience with undergrad music. But he sold all his saxophones and is like now a super rich techie guru. But he had this beautiful soprano that I was like, dibs, like I will name a price. I will buy that off you in a second. And it's so heavy. It actually gave me a ganglion on my wrist, but wow. It is so beautiful. And I use a Selma concept mouthpiece on that with the D'Addario Reserve, usually a 3 on soprano. I'm funnily enough, I'm a bit more consistent on soprano than I am alto with my reed size. And I should mention, because if there's any like Queenslanders watching, they'll know that I'm notoriously like not into the Selma concept, but that's on alto. I have played every Selma concept mouthpiece on alto that I can find, because it was the big thing. Like I feel like 5 years ago, or whenever it was that it came out and it finally got to Australia, everyone was like rushing out to buy it. I have not sounded good on any Selma concept alto mouthpiece that I've ever tried. I just sound tinny and thin. The soprano one was life-changing. The soprano one was exactly what I was looking for. So I don't know how that works. It's the same mouthpiece, but that's what it is. The soprano one is heavenly. I cannot make the alto one sound good. Okay, my tenor is a Series 3. Sorry. I used to have a Series 2. I have Series 3. It's the Dragon Bird series when Selma did the thing. So that was a funny story. I was actually in Melbourne for a gig with Borrega, and it was when Alan's Billy Hyde was closing down. There was one just like on whatever that means, Pitt Street. And I just literally went in to just have a look because it was a sale, whatever. And it was there. And I think it was only like $4,500. It was just like clearance, brand new, beautiful Dragon Bird tenor. Bought it on the spot and then was like, how do I get this back to Queensland? Like I'm in like cheapest of cheap economy. And so thankfully mum had flown down for the gig. And so what we did, my mother is like the most charming Italian mother ever. So she was like charming all the flight attendants so I could like sneak it on. In the end, we got 2 like roller carry-on bags. My soprano, my alto, and my newly bought tenor all went on the plane, like above in the cabin, just because she was charming the flight attendants so I could like run on the plane and sneakily like hide this tenor in an overhead carry-on. So that was just like an absolute fluke, and I love that tenor. On that one, I actually play an SD20 mouthpiece. It's one that is a little unusual. I don't think it ever really took off in Australia.
Yeah, it was for those playing at home, it's a Selma release, and it is, I believe, the Diastema Quartet model, which they released alto and tenor of, and I think they had intended to release a whole series, but they only released the two. But yeah, it's a fantastic mouthpiece if you check it out.
Yeah, I think it's great. And it's one that I bought overseas and absolutely loved. And I've just never really seen anyone else in Australia playing them. And I think that's speaking to a whole other conversation on, what stock gets sent to Australia and what we actually can try in person. That's a whole other video chat. So I play that again, size 3 reed. I have a metal, the gold-plated L11 BG ligature.
Oh, yeah.
On the tenor. And then for Barry, it's Yanagisawa, actually an intermediate Barry. It's something that my family bought for me. It was like all my birthdays, Christmases in ones when I was 13, and I got into the Queensland Youth Orchestras. I got into the wind ensemble, and they're like, we only can put you on Barry, but you didn't audition for Barry, and we don't have a Barry to give you. And so my family were like, well, maybe we'll just see what we can scrape. And anyway, got this. It's still like, it's literally like right next to me, actually. I love it. And I play a Selma 190 on that one, again, with the metal BG ligature. And it's a workhorse. I've always thought maybe I should upgrade my Barry, but it just sounds good. And I don't know, I've always found, and I always tell my students, the mouthpiece reed combo is always going to make a bigger difference than the horn. Like if you put a Yamaha 4C on a pro saxophone, you're not going to see this, you're not going to have the sound you're looking for. You're better off having a better mouthpiece on a lower horn. So I don't know, maybe eventually I will probably upgrade the Barry, but for now, maybe it's just sentimental or something. I don't know. I love it.
There's nothing wrong with that. My tenor is just clocked over 25 years this year, and it is absolute workhorse, and it looks like it's 25 years old. I probably should get a new one, but it is. I totally get the sentimentality of instruments, that's for sure.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. So hopefully that satisfies the curious ones of you there. That's just the obligatory gear talk. Now we can get back to the real content. Now, we're talking about Emma Demarco, and now we're going to talk about your performance career in terms of your work as a soloist and a chamber musician, and a large ensemble player as well. So maybe we can kick it off with, firstly, your sort of solo playing. Now, you've presented a lot of recitals at a lot of high-end events, several World Saxophone Congresses, the Australasian Congresses, NASA as well, I believe there was a thing there.
2 of those, yeah.
Yep, and a concert tour around Australia as well, and several other events. Maybe you could talk about maybe some of the more memorable concerts that really stick out for you, and why were they so memorable?
Yeah, okay. I think that my first tour around Australia, which was 2014, really stuck out because it was something that I just absolutely threw myself in the deep end for. And I hadn't really seen a young player, or really any saxophone players, do something similar. I literally produced it myself. I popped down my own money to make it happen. And so I had performances in Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and there was a fourth one, Canberra, I think. Yeah. Okay. What was that? 2016. I did 2 Australian tours. So I think it was Canberra, and then Hobart was 2016. I alternated those ones. Anyway, so what I was trying to do with that, I was in my second last year of my PhD, but I'd essentially, debuted on the international scene back, when I was 21, 3 years earlier with Borrega. And I just wanted to create opportunities for people to share in saxophone music, to share in what I do and what I love, and what makes saxophone music really special. And I did commission a lot of other young composers for that. So it was a real collaboration between composers that, I'd come through with, like Michael Buckenshev and Chris Healy, who we were all undergrads together. Andrew Ball wrote a piece. It was this collection of music for solo saxophone spread across 4 city concerts, all completely produced by myself, and it was absolutely terrifying. And I got positive feedback, and I got really negative feedback too, actually. Some people said that I was a bit big for my boots. Like, who did I think I was organizing something like this? And someone, I remember I created a poster, and I can't even remember what program I used, from Photoshop something, smack together a poster. And someone, a friend of mine actually plays a different instrument, rang me up and was like, I can't believe you would put your name in such big letters. Like, that's so arrogant of you. And I'm like, what was I supposed to do? Like, I'm literally trying to make a concert happen. I'm the only one playing. It's a solo saxophone recital. Like, what do you expect from me? Should I not put my name in big letters? Like,
wow.
It was such a, it was a very, it was very interesting to get that feedback, because I have, I often describe myself as like the little train that could. I'm someone that will work hard, set big goals. And if it takes me several years, fine, I'll just keep going and keep going and keep going and get there. So that really stood out because it was so terrifying. But then the flip side was like, coming to Sydney and, obviously connecting better with like you guys, Nexus and Continuum. And there was actually a lot of support, and the support came from the other saxophone players. They were like, yeah, like, you sound great. This is cool. Good job. And it was definitely, it was just, I guess, my first toe in the water of everything. I had to be the performer, I had to be the artistic director, I had to be the producer, making sure all the flights all lined up, and the composers were getting their commissions in on time, and like making it all happen. And so that was a real learning curve of like, if I'm going to be a saxophone player and have this career in Australia, I kind of need to be everything, and I need to have that artistic directorship under my belt and that producer role. Like, you can't just play saxophone every day in a practice room. Like, if you want to make money, you've got to at least break even. Mm-hmm. You need to figure some of this stuff out. So that definitely stands out as a massive highlight. I think some of my large ensemble experience, because I particularly love playing in large ensembles, stand out. One gig that I will forever absolutely love was when I was flown out to South Korea for the Tongyung International Music Festival, where they flew out 5 Aussies to fill out an orchestra for a production of Mark Anthony Turnage's, oh my gosh, my mind's just blank. It's his opera on the Oedipus.
Yep.
Yeah.
That one.
Hang on, it's in my Spotify. I'll find it really quickly.
If Andrew Smith is watching, maybe
what's
he can
the name of it?
Put it there.
Because it's not called Oedipus, Mark Anthony Turnage. Hang on.
That's all right.
It's really gonna bug me now. Greek. That's what it's called. Greek.
Greek.
Yes. So that was amazing. So they put together an orchestra of local musicians, and then they flew out 2 horn players, a trombone player, trumpet player, and then myself for the saxophone parts as Aussies. And it was the rest of the orchestra was Korean, and then the production company was actually English, so all the actors and the managers and producers. And that was exceptional. Like, it is just such a wild piece. But then, we stayed in Seoul for like a week doing rehearsals, so we'd just be like sightseeing all day. And then the music making was so, I don't know, there's something about Mark Anthony Turnage that really speaks to my like soul. I don't know, it's just so raw. It was fabulous. And then when we got to actually do the performances, we went down to Tongyong. That was really fascinating because it is such a confronting adaptation of the Oedipus story. And, I mean, I won't use the profanity for this channel, but there is this like a protest scene where, they let the Aussie trombone and trumpet player loose with megaphones, and they had to like scream like F you and all these profanities as part of the protest sounds. And, there was like small children, primary school age children in the front row with their families. And it was so like, I don't know, it was very confronting. But it was a very, very cool experience to have that opportunity, but not in Australia, to be like, okay, we're going to fly you out and we're going to do that. That was really, really special and stands out. And then I don't know what else stands out. I don't know. I think about some of these gigs that I've done, and I just, I feel very lucky because I think that some of the opportunities that I've had have come up because of hard work, but some have also come up because of a great support network in Australia, and the fact that, as a saxophone community, everyone is really supportive. I really, really loved, and this is a bit of a funny story, I loved working with Ben Price in Tasmania when I did a performance down there in Hobart, and we did some duos together, and he was a fabulous sound and fabulous young player. And I had caught a chest infection and was not well, but was like, the show must go on. And I had to circular breathe because I was doing cuckoo for soprano saxophone. And I was circular breathing with a chest infection, so it didn't sound great. And Ben was just like, if you faint, I'm going to catch you. Like, you're not going to get enough air in, because every breath was just not doing well with this chest infection. Oh, wow. But then it was like, the venue was just this beautiful spot in Hobart, and this really picturesque venue with these really this really cool audience that was super into like new music. It was, there's so many. More recently, I guess, was last year I got to do the Old Castle with QSO for the second time. And I don't know, I particularly love that solo. There's just something really special about that solo. And Benjamin Norley was conducting, and what a brilliant conductor, and brilliant conductor that understands the saxophone and what the saxophone can do, which is, can be rare. And he was just like, that last note of that solo, like, go to town, go as soft as you can get it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna hold this for a really long time. And there was just that moment in the concert hall last year, being back in the concert hall after such a long period of not having work with QSO, having this one note that just I was playing. And literally, I make a lot of eye contact with conductors when I play with the orchestra, because, I'm type A and I just need to know that I'm playing correctly. So I was just like staring at him holding this note, and he's like staring at me. And it was just, I was just fading it into nothing. And it's the only sound in the whole auditorium. And that was the moment that I finally felt back to normal after COVID. I mean, normal, new normal, whatever. But I felt like I was back in the groove as a player, because just on this one note. And I can't even explain that feeling. It's one note, like, what the hell? But it was just this moment that was so special and so captivating to just be able to hold the whole auditorium on that one note. And just having that like laser eye focus with Ben, where I was like, I'm still playing, like, don't cut me off yet. Like, I'm still going, I can still diminuendo further. That was reinvigorating after the craziness that came before it.
Cool. All right. It sounds like a phenomenal gig, and it would have been awesome to hear live. Just a message from Andrew Smith. This is going back a long time ago. When we're talking about GAP, it's actually known as the European University for the Saxophone. So I do apologize. That is the technical term for those who. But anyway. Moving on. So going back to your sort of your solo. Programming, in terms of like the recitals that you tend to present as a soloist, they tend to be predominantly Australian works and new Australian works, and you often commission them off your own back essentially. And we'll be curious to sort of know, like, how do you go about commissioning? I know you have connections with some of these composers from university, or networking from various other avenues and things, but how did you go about sort of commissioning a lot of these works and getting them to sort of, from conceptualizing them with the composer to presenting them on the concert stage?
I think you just got to ask. That's, like I said, I'm the little train that could. I'll just message you, and if I hear from you, great, and if I don't, I might forget, and I'll be like, I'll just message you again. You just got to ask. And I don't think, I've never met a composer, even super established ones, that were ever upset about someone approaching them about a commission. Yes, I've gotten that, look, I'm super sorry, I'm really busy, or I'm scheduled out for a lot of prominent composers, they're like, I don't have an opening to write a piece for another 2 years or 3 years or whatever it is. No one's ever been like, oh gosh, like, why did you even approach me to like write a piece? People aren't like that. And I don't think composers and musicians are ever upset to be approached with work. So that's probably my number one thing, is if you're polite and respectful, just send a message and ask. But of course, you want to ask with some sort of compensation. And that's the hard part for young musicians. For myself, I've thrown you know, a lot of my own dollars, or where I've had a personal relationship and they've gone, no, it's fine, I'll just write it for you. You know, I've tried to make recordings or program it, you know, have an agreed upon requirement of like, okay, I'll make sure you have a recording that you can use for this and blah, 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 you know, have some sort of transaction that way. It's not really fair, you know, they're not getting paid, but it's something if you don't have the financial backing. And I've applied for grants. The grant system in Australia, I'm not the biggest fan of, probably because I've never been successful with any of the major ones. So I'm a bit jaded. It feels like it's felt like with some of the major grant systems in Australia, you need a grant to get a grant. If that makes sense. It just feels like if you're coming into it, you know, it's the skipping rope going around, they're not letting you jump in. But I think that in the first instance, I guess, to the composers that I've worked with that maybe I didn't have a personal rapport with or some sort of networking connection with, you know, I knew their music. I'd been to concerts where their music had been premiered, and I could say, look, I'm approaching you because I was at this concert and this person played your piece, and this is what I liked about it, and this is what about your style I think translates well for saxophone and why I think we could create something. And that's probably a step that younger musicians maybe wouldn't think to take, or wouldn't know to take, or maybe don't have the time. I don't know. But for myself, that was something I always tried to do with composers and with approaching people. So even if they did say no, they could say, well, look, she knows, you know, she's done her homework. She's not just reaching out to everyone and sending the same formatted, you know, dear insert name email. She's actually coming to me knowing my work and thinking that this could work. And then I've been lucky to have it the reverse way as well, you know, by doing so many gigs that I've produced myself and taking on that producer role. It's put me in a position to meet, you know, Kathy Lakuta, who, you know, came to me. She came to a Borrega gig, I think, and was like, hey, like, I've heard you around the traps and I've seen you online and blah, blah, blah. And she, you know, she did it to me. She was like, this is your record and I've listened to your SoundCloud and blah, blah, blah. Like, let's play some of my music. I've got these pieces for saxophone. What do you want to do? And that started a journey of us playing her music together. And that started a journey of us, you know, that resulted like 5 years later, I don't know how many years later, where we're doing recitals in her native Ukraine. And we're, you know, because she's like, you know, let's do it. Like, let's go. Let's play my music in my home of Ukraine where that hadn't happened before. So, or I think she'd done her piano music, but not her saxophone music in Ukraine.
Okay.
Just to clarify. But if Kathy sees this, she'll correct it. She'll fix it in the comments. So I think that relationships, someone told me the other day that networking has evolved from it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And I agree. I think I agree with both. Like, if you are going out and meeting people and listening to their music and connecting with composers that way, that's great. But then if you're playing a lot of new music, people are going to know you for that. So they're going to want to approach you to play new music. And I still to this day get sent scores that, you know, are completely unsolicited. I actually got, with the recent two-set violin video releases, I got a whole slew of communication from trolling me to manuscripts, to compositions, where, you know, I was like, look, I can't play this, I can't program this right now, but here's my feedback. Like, I've given it a sight read and I hope this helps you. So, you know, and that's come out from being visible as well. So I don't know. And then as far as like the actual compositional process, I think you're very stuck to how the composer works. So I've worked with some composers that will just hand me a piece of music. It's completely done. This is my idea. I've worked with others that are like, here is 8 bars. I want to hear you play that 8 bars 3 different ways. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about where this is going. And you can't, as a player, I don't think you can determine that. You've just got to go with what their process is. And I definitely prefer to have input, but I don't hate it if you just hand me a piece of music. I mean, to this day, I've never been handed something that was completely unplayable. I've been handed some things with some weird multiphonics that I was like, I don't think that's going to sound at what you think it's going to sound like. But yeah, but like, yeah, you've just got to go with that. And obviously, you know, if you can have that process, like I said, you know, I had one piece that I got given 8 bars and I recorded it 3 different ways and I sent it back, and then, got 16 bars back, and it kept going back and forth. And that's how the piece came about. And that was really, really interesting because I did feel like I had a lot of input on that. And I had a lot of compositional influence on that because the way I was playing it, the recordings I was sending back were making a difference in what the final piece was. And that was very cool. But I don't necessarily need that to make sure the end product sounds good, Like, we don't get any input on what the Glazunov concerto is. Like, that's done, that's cooked. So if a composer sends you something that's cooked, it's like, okay, cool. Like, now I put my 2 cents in. And I think to finish that off, I think composers can be really, really funny about their process, particularly the ones that want to give you a finished piece. They're the composers I've found where they're like, you are my vessel. You are taking what I've written and my ideas and it's coming out through you. You're not putting your spin on it. And that can be hard to work with. But like I said, if the multiphonic sounds a bit crap and I play a different multiphonic, it sounds better. Most of the time they don't even notice. And I tell them later, I'm like, did you like how that sounds? Like, yeah, it sounds so good. I was like, cool, this is the fingering I used. Make sure you update the score, please. Because that's not going to work. There's some saxophone idiosyncrasies that I can tell you and I can share with you. And that's my way of, I guess, putting my spin on it is fixing those little things.
Cool. Yeah. No, absolutely fascinating. And yes, micromanaging composers they're very rare, but sometimes you do encounter them, and yes, it does make it interesting. But yeah, as I said, very rarely. But yes, now one thing we've got to talk about is, of course, Borrega. Now this is quite a big performance output for yourself and 3 others, I believe, being a quartet. So maybe for those watching, you could tell us a bit about Borrega itself, sort of how it came about, who's involved, what's the musical direction of the ensemble.
Yeah. So Borrega Quartet actually started as a student project. So when I was still in year 12, the group was founded right at the end of my year 12 year. The other 3 players were all first year at the con. And it was like our chamber music unit. Like, basically we saw it as 5 free credit points. Get together, play some tunes, go get a beer, get 5 credit points. Like that, I'm not trying to sound really slack, but that's what it was. And that was fine. That was cool. That's what we're looking for. And I remember we hired out, it was actually Rob Matthews, who is the player I bought the soprano off all those years later. He was the one that hired out every single piece of saxophone quartet music in the con library, but also the State Library of Queensland has a big sheet music repertoire, and hired out every piece, essentially every classic French saxophone quartet piece, check. The Glazunov there, check. Some weird little rinky-tink ragtime, but not really ragtime, I don't know, arrangements, check. Just got all of it. And we just went through it. We were given a mentor staff member. So that was Di Tolme, who did a lot of work with us. And, it really started quite humbly. It started as 4 kids studying the saxophone who loved playing the saxophone. And then we tried to organize, I think in our second year, we tried to organize our own little concert at 4MBS Studios here in Brisbane. Basically it's just all our family and friends that came. No one else came. It was fun. And we got some schools gigs. So we got, there's lots of, I don't know if they have these in other states, but there's lots of beginner music camps. So schools in Brisbane will get together and do a little region music camp for all the beginners or the intermediate students, all that sort of thing. And so they'll get pro musicians to come in and do a concert. And there's easily 15 of those across Brisbane, the greater sort of Brisbane Gold Coast area every year. So we were getting a lot of that work to come in, and, we had this folder, these infamous blue folders of Yakety Sax and The Entertainer, the Simpsons theme from The Simpsons. It was all this fun music for the kids. And that was the blue folders. And that was just the thing we did. And from there it grew, and then eventually we were at a point where we had to make this transition across to being professional players and professional, presenting ourselves as a professional group. And that that was really tricky, but essentially our big break, for want of a better word, was the World Sax Congress in Scotland in St Andrews in 2012. Because that was the first time we were really accepted to a major industry event. It was international. It was all Australian music. So we had a piece by Michael Barkenshev, a piece by Andrew Ball, and a piece by Louise Denson. Very contemporary, some jazz influences in there. You know, it was like, okay, this is kind of the big time now. You know, and then that turned into us doing our first album, all of Australian music. We released it digitally. We had a local artist, Megan Crocombe, do amazing artwork for us. We launched that in Brisbane with a big launch concert. We toured that. We did some concerts in Melbourne. You know, it just grew. Then we did the second album. And all of this was done off our own back. Like Andy produced and recorded our album and did that. You know, we got a local artist. We really put it all together. It's all Australian music, almost all of it commissioned exclusively for us. And then we've slowed down the last couple of years. We had some exciting things. So our quartet is myself on soprano, Samantha Mason on alto, Andrew Ball on tenor, and Ashley Porter on baritone. Sam and Andy got married a couple of years ago and then also had a beautiful baby. So there's a fifth member of Borrega now, little baby AJ.
Wow.
So that's it's kind of cool when, you know, you're in Nexus. You guys have got your 20th anniversary this year? Yeah, this year, right?
This year,
yeah.
Yes.
So you know what I mean? Like your quartet becomes almost like family. And it becomes people that are going to be your longtime collaborators and the people that you spend your weekends with and your holidays with. And that relationship, I couldn't have anticipated would ever come from, a 5 credit point bonus subject. But it has, and it's, you know, it's family now with kids and marriages, and it's really insanely special. So we were founded in 2007. So we've still got a long way to go till our 20th, but I think just the fact that like there's continuum, there's you guys are on your 20th, you know, we're still kicking, we're getting that third album done soon. Like it's really insane to have that many saxophone quartets in such a small, you know, because relatively speaking, Australia is a small saxophone scene. And I'm really excited for the next quartet, you know, that's going to come through and, you know, it's like this weird rite of passage, but it's so special and so cool.
Nice one. Now, just in terms of the group, just as you say, like you go and commission all of the works, is it the same sort of process as for your solo projects as well? Like just sort of asking questions, putting feelers out, and what's the worst that can happen? Just say no, kind of thing, or is there a slightly different process? Because I know Andy actually composes with the group as well, which is an added bonus.
Yeah, so he's composed really extensively for the group, which has been really amazing, but also really frustrating because he loves to write in like 1716 as a time signature. And like, I'm going to do this weird polyrhythm that I can't even demonstrate myself, but you guys have to play it because it's in your parts, not mine. So I say that with love. He's a great composer. And it's funny because, yeah, every time he's written for us, we listen to like the MIDI file and we're like, I don't like it. No. And then by the end, we absolutely love the piece. But that's been really helpful because it's almost like you think about other bands and pop groups and things, they're writing for themselves extensively. But whereas classical musicians, you know, we're not always doing that. We're not always expected to be playing all originals, so to speak, or writing the originals for ourselves. So Andy has been really cool in that way. And then, you know, we've had people just approach us, to be honest. Again, it's a case of the work we've put in with other schools gigs and other professional gigs and making sure we have the international presence with the Congress. You know, it's paid off because people are like, okay, I have this piece or I have this idea or I might like to write for saxophone quartet. Or in Kathy Lakuta's case, she had a horn quintet and she was like, hey, after working with you, Emma, what if I change this to a quartet piece and we can just see how it goes? Like, I just want to experiment. That presence has really helped. And I think that you know, like I said, that's a result of just being present and working and doing all those little things along the way and making sure you're making connections. Because what's the worst that could happen? But if people know you as a working quartet and group that can sit down and do something, that makes a big difference. I mean, even so a couple of years ago, just before, when was that? I think it was just before COVID. We did the Australian premiere of the Maslenka Quartet Concerto with Wind Ensemble. And that was an amazing opportunity that, again, came out of that artistic committee with the Queensland Wind Orchestra, knowing, oh, this is a cool piece. We like Maslenka. Where's a quartet? Great, they're there. They can pump out, you know, they're good players. They can pump out music in a short time frame. They can play at really high quality. Let's just get them in. And so building a name for yourself, you know, it's two parts. It's making sure you're doing the gigs and meeting people, going and performing, but also having an online presence so people can check on you, you know, when you're not looking. And it's how many years in the making to get to that point.
Cool. Now, I think you probably already answered this with your last answer, but what I was going to ask was just in terms of younger performers, say like recent graduates from the conservatorium or young musicians looking to sort of, you know, set their mark by, you know, setting up a chamber ensemble. What kind of advice from your experiences working with Borrega and other chamber projects would you give to these? And as I said, I think you probably answered these, but if there's anything you want to add or, you know, reiterate, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is to just start and to find ways to start that self-serving. Like I said, we were looking for some extra credit points and we got a bonus tutor. You know, we had that influence of someone like Di Tolmie helping us in our most fundamental years. If there's a way for young players or conservatorium students to do that, do it. Have an opportunity to develop your quartet with a leading player helping you. The other thing is, I think, don't be limited by the saxophone quartet model. Like if you want to develop, if your best friend is a flute player or a horn player or whatever, create other chamber groups. Yes, it will be easier maybe in the short term repertoire wise to go with an established format, but that's not where your career has to go. And realistically in Australia, you're going to be doing new music and you're going to be in that contemporary space. So why not have other instruments involved? You know, one of our most successful collaborations was with Hourglass Ensemble based in Sydney, where we had, you know, Andrew Kennedy on clarinet and Eva on flute. And we had, you know, pieces written for this like extended sextet with Woodwinds. And we were picking up, I think there was one piece where I think we had to play some clarinet and it was all moving around. And it's like, that's not a saxophone quartet piece. That's not, you know, that's not fitting the mold. So I don't think younger players need to feel like they have to do it exactly how other groups have done it. You know, you don't have to copy, you can play to your own strengths. And if you do decide to go the saxophone quartet route, don't be afraid to experiment. One of our best like loved pieces on our first album, pretty sure it's the first album. Yeah, the first album is Three Serpents, which was written for double saxophone quartet, but actually it's only 4 players. So like my part was soprano 1, tenor 2. Andy's part was tenor 1, soprano 2, and then vice versa for the altos and barries. And the whole piece, we're just changing. So the whole color keeps changing depending on what arrangement of saxophones. Like there's one bit where you've got like 2 sopranos, 2 altos, and then another bit where you've got 2 tenors, 2, you know, like 2 barries. It's all different and changing. I think look for those opportunities to be different and to experiment, particularly when you're young, because, you know, if it goes wrong and you're young, no one knows, no one cares. All those bad gigs I did when I was, you know, 20, who knows? I don't remember them. No, they're not recorded. They're not on the internet. It's fine. But I think experimenting and getting involved is the biggest. You know, it still blows my mind that in Queensland particularly, I don't see a lot of the saxophone players at events. Like I remember every time there was a saxophone in the QSO when I was an undergrad, I would be like messaging and calling anyone I knew in that orchestra for a free ticket. Like, please, have you got a comp? Have you got a comp? Like, it's Bolero. I need to be there. I need to see. And then I'd be like, you know, okay, no one's got a free one. I'll try and get like a $20 at the door student ticket. I don't know. There's some deal or something. Whereas I don't always see a lot of see that connection necessarily between younger musicians and established musicians. And I try sometimes to build that that gap, but I think we could do it better and have a lot of younger players taken under the wing of, I mean, I say old, I'm not that old, but I am older. I'm in my 30s now. I'm getting old, getting
Just
across the threshold.
more experienced.
More experience, yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
You know, I think, yeah, we can do better at taking more people under our wing.
Cool. Now, is there just briefly, is there a particular Braga concert that sticks out for you in terms of like being something that was like, wow, that was an amazing performance or an amazing piece or an amazing experience? I know there's a lot in there, but maybe if there was one that you just said, okay, this is probably my favorite Braga gig, what was it?
It's going to be a tie.
Okay.
Okay, so number one was, it's a tie for number one because they're different experiences, so it's hard to separate them. So definitely the Maslenka concerto with wind orchestra was beyond mind-blowing. To do a piece of that caliber, I'm a big fan of Maslenka. I think his music for saxophone is exceptional. And I really like, I don't know a lot about it. And I feel like, okay, I'm getting tongue twisted. So I think that the liturgical element to his music, and I have done research into some of the musical influences, but I don't know a lot about his personal religious beliefs. I don't want to misquote here, but there is a slight liturgical element to his music that I particularly connect with, not particularly being a religious person necessarily, but as a musician, I think I find so much music that is liturgical or written for the church, you know, your classic Bach, like it's just beautiful sounds, and it's just so captivating, and I just really connect with that. So that was a particularly exceptional performance too, because as a quartet, that was our first like concerto. You know, it's not that often that quartets do concertos.
No, I could probably count on my hand how many times we've done one, or two. Maybe.
Oh yeah, the Jody Blackshaw one.
There was Jody Blackshaw, but we also did Lena Katz-Chernin last year as well.
That's right. Yeah, see what I mean? Like that is such a rare experience to do that sort of solo performance. But then again, to do it with your family, essentially, to do it in that scenario where your playing styles are so enmeshed. And, you know, I don't think I talked about it earlier, but like playing in a quartet and chamber music where we've been playing together so long, sometimes I could give, as a soprano player, a really half-assed cue, or really like I'm just distracted and I'm not actually cueing properly, but just from the inflection of my breath, they'll catch it because they know me that well. That's a style of playing, to play with people that know your intricacies, to know you literally how your breath sounds and what you're communicating in that breath is a really just mind-blowing experience, and worth anyone pursuing, any music student pursuing chamber music, whether you want to turn the ensemble into something else or not. But then the tie is our first album launch was a house concert, and so it was at Sammy and Andy had this great little rental in Brisbane, and you know, we pulled all the couches out and we had just chairs, and all of our parents like made food for it, and it was this really like dark room, and we had some candles. It was, and I don't know, it was just this experience of like, we've created something, we've created this album, and we're sharing it with our loved ones in this beautiful space in the house in this really casual way. It was just so special, I think, to launch the album that way, and to have this really intimate thing where, you know, we're talking to people and we're introducing the pieces we're about to play to people that have literally been the reason why we're there in the first place. People from our parents who drove us, you know, paid for all the lessons and drove us, from our friends who have helped listen to rehearsals and given us feedback, to the composers that wrote the music. Like, it was just like a real celebration of like, you know, you guys made it, and this is the support system that got us there. You know, I can't talk enough about how much a support system is absolutely crucial, and is pretty much the only reason why I have my career, you know, is because I've had that support. So that was particularly special. Like, that just stands out.
Cool. Now, just sort of talking about, as you mentioned, like you play a fair bit with the Queensland Symphony, which is awesome. And you know, you would have had your fair share of different experiences, different orchestral repertoire. What would be your favourite orchestral work to perform with the orchestra, or a orchestra?
Yeah. Probably Old Castle. I think
Hmm.
that's just beautiful writing for the saxophone. But then very, very close to that is Rachmaninoff's Symphonic Dances, because that's also beautiful writing for the saxophone. And I think it's really, really special to have those opportunities where the melodic line just works so well on your instrument and is essentially, I say easy to play. It's not. I mean, you got to sort of be in tune and in time and all of that. But you don't necessarily have to think about it too hard. Something like the symphonic dances from West Side Story. There's a few little things where I'm like jumping up to a high F where I've got to actually think about what I'm doing, not necessarily think about the interpretation as much. So they would definitely be up there. I don't know. I think it's really special. Like Bolero is, I mean, another great one. I wouldn't necessarily say it's my absolute favorite.
Hmm.
Particularly playing it on Sopranino, which I had to do earlier in 2021. No,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
saw that because normally they just do, soprano, tenor, and you just double it. But yeah, that would seem
Yeah.
like an odd choice. Not from
Well,
your part, but
yeah, I think that the conductor at the time was very focused on composers' intentions. And as I know very well, and as I've told to many people, yes, Ravel did technically write it for Sopranino, but he did write it for Sopranino in F, which is a Sopranino that never existed.
hmm.
And that's a conversation I had to have at the orchestra with certain people where they're like, but didn't he invent the saxophones? There was the E flat and B flat family, and there was the F and C family. And I'm like, yeah, but even in that family, the sopranino was not F. And I sort of had to Google it in front of them and show them, like, actually, I can't play it on a sopranino in F. And the part was written for sopranino in F, which is what blows my mind, is that this was a proper orchestral score, like a printed musical edition. It went through an editor somewhere, got printed, got sent to the orchestra, a sopranino in F part. And I just I just don't understand. Like, thankfully, the librarian at QSO, Nadia and Chen, who I think is the assistant librarian, is her title. Those girls are amazing, and they like whipped out on Sibelius a quick part for me in E flat
Oh, that's
so that I
awesome.
could actually, yeah, play it on soprano. Because I'm like, you can't expect me to transpose and play sopranino. And I wasn't actually warned as well. So that gig at the start of last year, I was booked on soprano as per normal, as you'd expect. And I rocked up and opened the folder to the sopranino and F part. So I had about 10 minutes, 20 minutes notice of, oh, by the way, you're going to play sopranino and the part we've given you isn't in the right key. So we pulled it together. It was fine. And then we did Bolero later in the year with a different conductor who wasn't really a fan of. So when you play it on Sopranino, you can't even play the whole Bolero solo because the Sopranino doesn't go low enough in the
Yeah, yeah,
range.
yeah.
So yes, so you need the tenor player to finish the solo on soprano. So the conductor we had later in the year wasn't a fan of that timbral change from sopranino to soprano. So I just took the opportunity to suggest, well, what if I just play the whole thing on soprano? It'll sound way more beautiful. And he took that, and yeah, I'm back to soprano. It's fine. It's totally
Nice.
fine.
Wow, that's quite an experience. Yeah, just the
Yeah.
yeah, and definitely, it's an orchestral gig. It's yeah, a bit daunting when you get something like
Yeah.
that. That's
You
cool.
just got to turn up and you got to do it and you got to play in time and in tune. And that doesn't sound that hard. But yeah, I actually I still get a lot of nerves in orchestral playing. And the only way I can get through it is I visualize a roller coaster. And so when I'm sitting there, like about to play the solo, about to play Bolero, whatever it is, as I'm feeling my heart rate go up, I'm literally sitting there visualizing myself on that ascent of a roller coaster, that bit where you get right up to the top and then they like hold you there for a second before they, do the descent. And then as I start playing, that's the descent of the roller coaster. And I try and like release the anxious tension as I start playing the solo so that it's just this rush out of my body so then I can actually just play the solo. And I don't know, it's my little like performance anxiety trick, but yes, I still would rather be doing that on a soprano rather than a sopranino.
Nope, for sure. I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, we're chatting with Emma Demarco. If you are watching on the YouTube stream, feel free to drop a question. We can read those out as we go along. But to sort of finish up this component of the Q&A, one thing I would be sort of curious to, well, two things actually. First of all, you talked about earlier that, there's a couple of things in the pipeline for this year, and, with COVID, that sort of made you sort of rethink how you approach these things. Is any sort of particular projects for 2022 that we should keep an eye out for, that you're planning and plotting?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All the things planning and plotting. Yes. So like I mentioned earlier, this year is kind of my year to transfer a lot of what I do to an online platform. So I'm really keen to grow my own YouTube channel with kind of a mix of educational content, but also repertoire, recordings, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then that will also translate into a series of live performances online. So I've got a few dates mapped out, and they'll be released. I think the plan is to release them the first week of February, all the dates for what's happening online. But what I really wanted to do this year was, just take a mix of things. So it's not only going to be some of my commissions and new pieces and also my own compositions, but one of the events is also kind of going back to the roots, so to speak, and doing a program of French music and a program of American music as well. So I wanted to have the idea behind the concert series is kind of like a documentation of my whole musical journey. For me, 2022 is kind of like it's like a cap on all that's come before, and then a starting of this is the new path, the online path. And I really want to do that through YouTube and through video. I've also got, if all sticks to plan, I don't know, I always feel really weird about announcing things now. I don't know if you feel this, because it's like, what if COVID derails it again? But
yeah, but well, probably the easiest thing would be, if people are interested to see what you're up to, probably, sign up to your mailing list and join the socials and all that, and just, watch your space. Yes. Cool. All right. Now, we do have another question from down south. Nessia has two questions for you relating back to the education side of things. First of all, earlier you mentioned learning other woodwinds in order to be more marketable. A more marketable teacher. Is that something that your teachers actively discussed with you or encouraged?
I'd say that they discussed it a little bit. It was definitely with flute and clarinet. I was very much encouraged to do flute and clarinet, and that started from high school. Like I said, my high school teacher started me on clarinet and had me doing clarinet A&B exams when I was in, year 10, 11, 12 at school. I picked up flute. I was at a state high school in Queensland, so we get also free music lessons in the day. The Queensland State Music program is amazing, and he was a flute specialist, so I got instead of having saxophone lessons at school, which I guess is what I should have been enrolled in, he switched me over to flute so I could pick up some flute there. So I came into uni already having that, and so that focus, those chats with Barry was like, okay, well, make sure those chops are up to scratch, and then you pick up little opportunities like musicals and whatnot. The double reads was definitely more of a goof, more of just like giving it a red hot go, and just seeing what came of it. And then that proved to be like, hang on, I'm seeing jobs advertised for mixed woodwinds, and actually this is probably something I should make sure at the very least I can teach beginner oboe and beginner bassoon. And then in 2015 my position at Grace came up, which is a really forward-thinking school. So it's a Lutheran college. It's just it's a Lutheran school, but the Grace Academy is our extra co-curricular performing arts arm of the school. And it's hard to describe because it's almost like a business venture of the school as well. We have external music studio and dance studio, and we run like high level productions, and we have industry partnerships and, all sorts of things. So as that role, it was like, okay, we want a woodwind specialist. Like, you teach all five, right? And so it was like, well, yeah, I don't know about bassoon and oboe, but yes, I can do, this is what I can do to a certain level. And it's like, cool, let's chuck you in. And that was a life-changing teaching experience, because it was a position where I could be the best educator I could be, but I'm actively encouraged to be an active performing artist and be an industry professional so that I have knowledge and experience and skills and anecdotes to bring back to my students, which is quite rare, I think, for a lot of high schools, particularly in Queensland.
Cool. And the second part of that question is this some I've got to find the question first. On the flip side, is it something that learning other woodwinds, is that something that you would encourage with your students?
Yes, all the time. Yeah.
Okay.
So, sorry, that was embarrassing.
No, that's
yes. So at a high school level, like I said, the school that I work at is very forward thinking. And part of my job is to coordinate and run a program called Game On, which is a middle school music extension program. It's for years 7s to 9. Students come in, they have an instrument. As part of this program, they learn a second instrument for free for 3 years. They also do Amy B theory up to at least Amy B grade 2 or grade 3 theory, depending on their skills. And then we do a whole heap of we do oral skills with them. We have a Game On choir to build vocal skills as well and an understanding of the body. We do performance projects. We did improvisation, a course on improvisation last year with all of them, no matter what their instrument was, classical, jazz, influences, whatever. They all had to improvise. We even did, the year before, we did like how to make a performance pack. So they had to write their own little biography and take a headshot and create a promo pack and write a concert program bio and that sort of thing. So that program there, the core of the program really is the theory and the second instrument. And it's there that we try and, I'm really focused on giving students that opportunity to either think of, okay, I'm a woodwind student, I might pick up flute, because then when they get to senior school and we run our musical productions at my school, we run them not like a high school music production. They're almost like a semi-professional production. And our woodwind kids, they're all on reed books. So they're all expected to be playing the gamut of instruments. So all our saxophone students are rotating through saxophones through our ensembles. No one's sitting on an alto chair the whole way through grade 7 to grade 12. They're all picking up double reeds to make sure they can cover that. And I might come in and play some of the hard stuff. So I think we've got a production this year in 2022. So I think I've got to cover some of the piccolo work. I'm the stopgap, but essentially these kids are on, they're on doubles, and we've had students pick up oboe in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, or bass clarinet or whatever, so that's at a high school level. But then I see a lot of students who come to me just before uni auditions, and I'll say, do you play flute or clarinet? And if the answer is no, my first piece of advice is you need to pick it up. You need to start now, because what's your goal here? And 9 times out of 10, they say, well, I want to do something like you do, is like, I want a bit of teaching, a bit gigging, and maybe I'll take some corporate gigs. And I was like, well, if corporate gigs, particularly, if they're looking at someone that can play 3 instruments and you can only play 1, why would they book you? That's an even more competitive world in some ways. So you need to, I can't stress it enough, that kind of flexibility of understanding that, it's the thinking that's been around for maybe around 10 years now around portfolio careers. For me, it's like, I can't stress that enough at a young age, because the more you do younger, the less you got to do later, I don't know.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, just since we're talking about your work as an educator, your current roles, I should say, at Grace Academy are head of woodwind and community programs. What can you tell us a bit, sort of what that sort of entails? I imagine head of woodwind would be running the department, but the community programs, what's that sort of involve?
Yeah, so I think that's where I started to sort of get at that Grace Academy is really unusual for a school to have. It's almost a business of the school. It's part of our Grace Innovation and Excellence department, where what we're trying to do with Grace Academy is we're trying to create an all-inclusive performing arts academy. So not only do we run programs and service the students of the school, but we have external programs as well. So that's where my community programs role can come in a little bit. Mm-hmm. So some of those programs include our external music studio, which is a fully serviced focused, all instruments, private studio focused on students doing, exams and high level performance things for all instruments. We have an external dance studio as well. We run other programs such as our Game On program, which is our middle school music extension program. We also have a flexible pathways program, which is where we mentor students who are wanting to do music in tertiary. So in years 10, 11, and 12, they can get assigned with a mentor like myself, who will then guide them through whatever steps they need in order to be successful in obtaining a tertiary placement in the performing arts. So I have some students, year 10 students this year starting, who are really gung-ho about getting into the conservatorium, or one wants to go to UQ, and it's like, okay, I'm going to sit down with you and we're going to go through absolutely everything from what you need to be practicing to how you need to prepare for that audition. And then we do productions, we do major community events. We did a massive community carols event at the end of last year as well. It's kind of hard to explain, because I'm there, I guess, in a capacity, like I said, as you said, head of Woodwind and running a Woodwind department, working with the curriculum and guiding staff and that sort of thing, and also teaching myself. But then it's this bigger picture thinking of how can we run these high level programs that normally a school wouldn't run. And we have one really exciting industry partnership that I think is going to be announced later this year, which will connect us to, key industry players in the performing arts. So students in our academy will actually be able to have opportunities in the music industry with this key player, which is really, again, really unheard of. So it's a pretty special place to work. And I work with a really amazing team. So the leadership team is Rachel Howley, who is almost Dr. Rachel. She's just finishing her DMA in conducting at the moment, who is our fearless leader and is a visionary and who set this all up. And then there's myself, and then there's Kerry Thomas, who is a brilliant composer. He writes a lot for the horn and trumpet, like all the brass Amy B syllabus things, and he looks after our culture campus, because we actually have 2 campuses of our school, as well as then the community programs. So that's the one that I look after, and Rachel's got Rothwell. So it's a big program, and it's internal and external, and like I said earlier, it's the only teaching position I've ever really found, particularly at a school level, where being an industry professional yourself and doing things, I'm only there 0.8, I'm only there 4 days a week, because it's like, well, no, you need that 5th day. You need to get out and you need to go be doing things. And you're a QSO on Friday, like, don't come into school and, rejig your timetable, because we get, certain allowances for these industry events, and for being really active and speaking at conferences is encouraged and all that sort of thing. It's like, if you don't do that, that's a bigger issue than if you do. So it's a pretty special role, and I'm really happy there, and I have some amazing students. So I'm very, very lucky.
Nice. It sounds like just a really unique and phenomenal program. So yeah, be curious to see how that sort of continues to grow, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, just talking about, let's bring it back to yourself as an educator. Now, you have taught at other institutions and schools around the Brisbane area, and given workshops and things like that. So you're quite an experienced educator, as we know. How would you describe your teaching philosophy?
Okay. I think that my overarching philosophy is work smarter, not harder, is probably the best way I can describe it. I'm not one of those teachers that's like, you need to practice 25 hours a day. Like, that's not realistic. And actually, with a lot of my younger students, I'm actually advocating for very short practice times, which often can be a bit controversial. Like, my beginners, I'm only recommending 10 minutes a day. Which I think is perfectly reasonable, but a lot of local, you have conversations with people and they find that so bizarre, that it's only 10 minutes or only, 5 minutes is better than nothing, to me is fine, but I digress. So I think my philosophy is always about how can you achieve something really effectively with not doing it. We don't need to be fancy. We don't need frills. We don't need crazy things. We don't need wild fingerings for altissimo and all the like, just do it simply, get it done. Then you can focus on the important stuff. You know what I mean? Your technique should serve your musicality, not the other way around. If you're being held back by something in your technique, let's just quickly fix that so we can actually spend lessons talking on bigger musical concepts. So that would definitely be my philosophy. To a higher level, you have taught at the Queensland Conservatorium, and most recently, actually, I'm currently affiliated with the University of Queensland, and that's quite recent. My approach there is a well-rounded education. I actually had a lesson with a student that had applied to UQ and got like a free lesson as part of that application with me. And in that lesson, I talked a lot about, well, what can you tell me about the major saxophone sort of eras of classical saxophone, and let's talk about what a first recital could look like. So with conservatorium level students, yes, that philosophy of, work smarter, not harder is there, but it's got this added component of context, of understanding the history of your instrument and the history of the genre that you're specializing in. You're not just doing this because you want to play Fuzzy Bird Sonata and Clonos all the time. If that's all the sort of repertoire that you're studying, that's not great, because how are you ever going to get orchestral gigs if you're not working on something that's giving you the tone and the understanding of what Rachmaninoff's writing was like, or anything, or even Bernstein and West Side Story. Like, do you have that flexibility? Like, my approach with conservatorium students is always about expanding the horizons, doing a little bit of everything, making sure that after you've worked with me, even for a year, you're working on more repertoire than you actually probably need for your recital. But in doing so, you've got a piece from every kind of different era, and you've got different styles, and you've got a real balance across the board. But then maybe your recital's only 20 minutes, so you just pull the best 20 minutes out of what you've prepared, or 30 minutes or whatever it is. So I would definitely say that is kind of my guiding philosophy. And I do think it's different as well. I think that what I've seen, internationally across the board is that people tend to go to teachers to either to emulate them, or to go, well, you're a brilliant player, so I want to be like you. Or they go to teachers because they're like, well, I only want to do this. And I think that's great, but I don't think that's setting up any of those students for a successful career long term. And I think that should be the goal. If we're educating at that level, at a conservatorium level, the goal should be to make sure that they walk out of that place and they can get gigs, and they can get teaching work, and they can feed themselves from music. Like, that's my approach.
Cool. If there was one thing that you would like your students to take away from your lessons, like just, say, it was Jimmy or Jimette, and they're just kind of like, oh, they really struggle, but there's one thing you just want them just to grasp onto, what would it be and why?
Playing time. Rhythm. Oh my gosh, look, rhythm is frustrating for everyone. There's some really tough pieces, the Albright has some weird counting in it, I get it, but I just don't necessarily see a clear focus on just playing in time. And that's something that's at all levels, and that's, it's something that is the reason why I've gotten some work. I got some work last year, not in the classical field, in the more commercial field, that it was like, well, we need a saxophone player that can show up and play in tune and in time. And the players we're getting from a jazz background are not doing that. So we're going to try you, Emma. Even though you're a classical player and your sound's a bit boring, you got this rounded classical tone, you're going to be able to play in tune and on time. So I got work that other players missed out on just because I could play in time. So I think it's so simple. I wish it could be so inspiring, and I wish I had some magical wise words, but it's literally just play in time, use a metronome. That's it. Like, I can't make it any clearer than that.
No, that's cool. So for those watching, chatting to Emma Demarco, if you do have any questions for Emma, please feel free to put those in the YouTube chat, and I can read them out as we go along. Now, I am just conscious of time. It's amazing we're having a great chat, and I just sort of looked at the clock and went, oh, wow, we've been talking that long. But it's great because there's a lot of things we're learning here. But I'd just like to sort of move on very quickly to your sort of research and musicology work. Now, at the start we said you have pretty much a hat for every day of the week in terms of, musician, educator, entrepreneur. There's so many things going on. It's really hard to keep up sometimes. But in terms of your musicology work, you've presented a variety of papers at several conferences on a bunch of different topics, and of course you completed your PhD, which is actually quite an interesting topic. And I do believe the research was focused on, and do correct me if I'm wrong, the performance of classical saxophone music in Australia, with the aim of fostering further development and growth through increased engagement with digital music making practices and higher job satisfaction of performers, quote unquote. And that is, I remember you interviewed myself and a bunch of other people that I know as well about this, and it seemed like a really interesting thing, and it seems to be a lot of what you're practicing, what you're preaching in terms of, it came out wrong, but just in terms of like that, you're sort of like taking to heart a lot of that in terms of what you're doing today, even. But maybe you could just sort of briefly tell us a little bit about what the topic is, what it's about, and why you saw the need to examine this area, and did you find any sort of defining outcomes as a result of this research?
Yeah. The quickest way I can explain my PhD research is that I really had two outcomes. The first is I wanted to academically get on the record in the literature, what is classical saxophone music? That's something that came out of my literature review. I didn't expect it necessarily to be an outcome. It's something that came to me sort of 2-3 months in, where I literally couldn't find a single quote or a single reference that said, this is what classical saxophone music is. Because all of my supervisors, all they're reading from my work is like, well, you keep using this term classical saxophone. You haven't actually defined it or made, what is it? So that became, very early on, that became a clearly defined thing of this. I want to talk to people in the field. I know what it is. We know what it is. We play it every day, but I want to talk to people in the field so I can academically say in the literature, this is what classical saxophone is. And so that's sort of the start of the thesis. And then what I did from there was an ethnographical study of really prominent Australian classical saxophonists and saxophone quartets like Nexus, as well as a reflexive element with my own practice in Borrega, to kind of document what Australian classical saxophone music is, what the industry is, across some key lenses. So there were 3 key ones. The first was artistic relationships. So looking at things like, what does it mean for Australians to be playing Australian music, as an example. The second was digital music making, which was, at the time, looking at the slight emergence of technology into the classical saxophone world. And that already feels slightly outdated. And the third is performer satisfaction. So the final chapter, that third lens, was, at the end of the day, are these established players that I look up to, that I'm trying to build a career towards, are they happy? Are they enjoying what they do? Why do they do what they do? Like, when they finish a gig, are they like, yeah, that was great? Or they like, oh, another one in the bag, like, glad I got that, couple of $100, let's go have a beer. Which is, interesting reactions. And I learned a lot, and I love to tell the story that when I was coding all my research and putting it together, I had to create a do not use code. So there was a lot of controversial things. Saxophone players are very rude to each other. And I will say, with the Nexus interview, it's not that you guys said anything rude, but there were a few times you guys took little jabs at each other, like little cheeky remarks, that when you're in the room, it was fine, but when you read it on paper, it sounded like you guys did not like each other at all. It sounded like you were being really mean to each other. So I was like, okay, well, we can just forget about that. But it was really amazing to interview all these established players. And what I hope that my thesis created and what my intention was to create a document which was like, this is what classical saxophone is now, this is the potential that it has, this is what the artists are doing, this is what it is, this is an ethnography of this field. So the fact that you guys contributed to that, and so many Australian players contributed to it, I was extremely fortunate. And it's still wild that pretty much everyone I approached said yes. There was only actually one person that said no, which was fine because I had so many other brilliant players. And in the end, I think they took 8 months to mark it, because when I finally handed it in, there was no one, like, I'd interviewed all the major saxophone players, so there was no one left to actually mark my thesis. So they had to go to the States, and they got 2 international markers, which is quite rare. Normally, I think there's only one domestic and one international. So that was interesting. But yeah, that's the summarized version. Hey, like, it's an 86,000 word document.
Yeah, it's very hard to summarize these PhDs, but
Yeah.
I think that was a very good job.
Oh,
So like, if you do get a chance, I'd highly recommend checking it out. It's quite a significant contribution to examination of the classical saxophone scene here in Australia. And I think you said a bit earlier, like, it's a school of playing that sort of is really coming to the fore a lot more, particularly in the 21st century. And I think it's going to be interesting looking back on that, I feel, in probably about 10 or 20 years' time, and seeing, how it's sort of evolved from that sort of snapshot of time that you'd had then.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, we're sort of coming to the end of things. If you do have a question, please feel free to ask. But one thing I really want to ask you actually is, you've recently sort of taken the social media platforms by storm in a big way. And it was sort of is amazing. Like, I did a gig with Andrew a couple of days ago, or last week, and he was just saying, yeah, every time I open up Facebook or whatever, the first thing I see is Emma. And it's just like, oh, wow, that's great. You are quite prolific these days, and I believe it had something to do with a recent experience that you've had working with a certain group called the Two Set Violins.
Two Set Violin. Yeah, Brett and Eddie from Two Set Violin.
Right. So maybe you could tell us a little bit, because I know you, there's the videos out there, and, it was quite a huge thing. And I think for you, that sort of was a bit of a genesis for you to sort of, really sort of jump on that social media bandwagon. So I would presume that you would say that, being active on social media is quite an important thing for a musician, I would say, judging from the way you roll things. And my little dabbles of things, I've noticed, it sort of does help sort of get your presence and name out there. But what, in terms of like, for musicians looking to sort of crack this social media enigma, say, like for an older generation musician looking to try and get into this field, or a younger person who may not actually have a digital presence yet, maybe you could sort of share some experiences that you've learned, and some things maybe that they could do to help promote themselves online.
I mean, I guess I had social media as an area of growth for quite a while. I have my YouTube channel for a long time. And then I've known Brett and Eddie years. Brett particularly, I've said this before on other platforms, like Brett and I taught at this little music school in Sunnybank in Brisbane, and it was like, it was just one of those things where you just know someone forever, and those boys are hilarious. Like, that channel is exceptional, and I don't think anyone saw that coming. These 2 guys that play classical music, very naturally funny, just creating these off the cuff videos. I remember that I used it when I first followed them. It was on Facebook, and they post these little videos from like the practice rooms at the con, where we were all studying, just making fun of just like normal stuff, like, oh, that person in the room next to you is playing something crazy, or whatever. It's just amazing to see what that's grown into. But I didn't realize how big it has gotten until we did those videos in 2021. So we did 4 all up. So I did one with them in 2020 where I got a little hint of it, but we did 4 all up last year that sort of came out over the course of, say, 2 months. And holy dooly. I got everything from lovely Instagram DMs and emails. I got scores sent to me. comments, people being like, yay, like sax gang, like saxophone representation, which was really cool. I did get a little bit trolled. I had some really mean comments and messages sent as well, which I think, just comes with the territory. But I think filming with them really taught me a lot about what the point is and what they're doing. But it also made me see that if you're going to go into social media, you need to be yourself, and you need to connect it to whatever your niche is. So for me, I love sharing like tips and tricks. I think I've got on my TikTok bio like friendly neighborhood saxophone teacher. Like that is my vibe. I can't escape that. I have that sort of personality. So that's what I'm going to share. But also, like, I think the TikToks that I make are hilarious. I just love making that. I think I've got like 100 drafts ready to go. Like, you say you see my face all the time, you would have no idea how many like drafts. I'm just trying to release them like one a day just to not overwhelm people.
Oh wow.
Because yeah, like I have a blast. Like, you hear these audios. Usually I record on TikTok, but funnily enough, they've blown up way more on Instagram. Instagram just seems to be the platform where the most people find me and connect with me, which I guess would be another tip, is to just find the platform where you work best and it fits in with you best. But I find it easier to record on TikTok than Reels on Instagram, so then I just post it across. But I just hear these audios and I just think of these, I just think of musical scenarios. And, just before this, I was recording some TikToks because I just was scrolling. I was like, oh, that would be really funny. Okay, I'm going to practice lip syncing. So I think my vibe and my personality goes with those goofy jokes. I can't pull off the ad-libbing and the funniness that Brett and Eddie do. Like, that was something I learned like when we did the teaching them saxophone video, where it was just the two boys and me, and I just handed them some saxophones. And it was the redemption of Brett saying that he thought the soprano saxophone looked the easiest of all the saxophones. They have a natural like improv stand-up comic style that I do not have. I have to think about what I say. So something like TikTok, where the lip sync, the audio, the joke is in the audio, and I can just apply that context or that idea that I can stop and think about, that works for me. So I think that's really the key, is that authenticity and finding your style. I could never create the videos that they create, but I can create maybe more educational content and repertoire performances and things that actually fit my strengths. And that's always going to be the thing with social media. Like, a good example of that is I have a Twitter. I sometimes use the Twitter. The Twitter format just doesn't work for me. Like, I don't know why. I'm never funny on Twitter, so I don't really focus it there. So I think anyone, particularly older musicians, Gen Z, this doesn't apply to Gen Z, the teenagers, young, like, figured it out. They're funnier than me. They're quicker than me. They can pump it all out. I'm not worried about them. They will figure it out. But I think for older musicians, it's becoming more of a requirement, particularly in this, well, I was going to say post-COVID, but we're not post-COVID, in this COVID world of, if you want to continue building a name when you can't physically be at a gig, this is a great option. So I don't know. I think I'm hilarious. I think the TikToks are fun. Not everyone is just a fan.
Well, I have recently a colleague at work had sort of bullied me. Well, not bullied, but just said, "Oh, you should check out the TikTok." And being the old man I am, like, yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from. It can be fun, but yeah, I'm a bit I'm archaic with that sort of stuff. But hey, I can see where you can have a lot of fun with it, and definitely help with promoting yourself, of course. So we're just sort of coming up to the end of things. Just turning things a little bit more serious now. Of course, the two last 2 years have been not fun, and this year's not going to a great start. Of course, we lost Betty White, and we've also got COVID still hanging around, of course. But in terms of how it sort of affected us musicians and artists and the performing arts and creative arts, like, it's really, taken us for six in terms of what's happened to us. And, we've all been impacted. We've all had to, in some shape or form, adapt to, what is referred to as the new norm. What are some of the things that you've learnt during this time, like, going from, being an active performer, and then, things are shutting down, and then just kind of, as you said earlier, you just kind of had to go out there with a bit of caution, and then, rethink a few things.
Yeah. I think my biggest takeaway from it all, and the thing that I would share with others, is that long-term projects need to be the goal now. I feel like there's this quote, I think it's Beyonce, I can't remember, but there's this quote about like no one listens to albums anymore. People pump out a single and a single, and it's a reference to pop music, but I think it's a really good point that in a lot of arts platforms, social media, for better or, there are a lot of positives, has fueled this idea of constantly needing to put out content, constantly needing to have the next gig, the next thing. So my biggest takeaway from all this is to actually slow down and to go, okay, what longer term project could I invest in that actually is going to be more valuable as a piece of art or as a contribution to my community, in that sense. So, because it is hard to announce things, and you do announce gigs and then they get cancelled, and then there's so much uncertainty. And one thing that I was hesitant to mention earlier, but I'm just going to, it's not a big deal, it happened, is, I've worked a lot in publishing. So one thing that I'm hoping is going to come out this year is I actually wrote a technical workbook that I've had on the back burner. It's been one of those projects that I've like dabbled in on and off for a decade. I actually started that in my honors year because that was my honors research, is how to practice saxophone technique. And so that was 2011, and it's now 2022, and I've just finished it now. So that was something that I was like, I don't need, if I keep focusing on the next gig and the next opportunity and the next thing that I can do, I'm going to run myself into the ground. Why don't I actually focus on not having so many instant achievements and actually do some of these longer term projects? And I think in the end, that's going to create a better product because it's something that I can put out and that's really meaningful, that I've spent a considerable amount of time on. And it's going to make sure that we're not burning ourselves out, because if you're pushing to a concert and then it gets cancelled and then you're pushing, and it's not healthy. It's not healthy for anyone, just from the disappointment to the emotional and physical labor that needs to go into all these events that end up getting cancelled. So looking for opportunities to take time to do an album, to do a book, to do a this, to do a that, to do some big commissions, maybe work with a composer on a concerto, or take time to go find funding to pay for a commission for a concerto. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I don't necessarily myself want to fall into the trap of just trying to get the next achievement and the next thing after my name. I want to actually take time and make valuable things. And I hope that others would feel the same way, and we can kind of celebrate that a little bit more.
No, it's very good advice. Obviously with COVID, it's changing the musical landscape in terms of live performance and the way that we would sort of traditionally view it. With the emergence of streamed concerts and people, releasing content online more than they had previously. What do you think? Would you sort of see happening? This could be like a Brisbane focus or an Australian focus, or even a global focus if you'd like. In terms of like, how would you sort of foresee performers sort of moving on from this? Like, I know we're not quite out of the woods yet, but in terms of like musically, is it ever going to sort of go back to what it was before, or do you think there's going to be some changes in terms of what performers will be required to do in terms of to perform?
Yeah, it's really hard for me to not be cynical. I have definitely fallen into this like, oh, it's never going to be the same, grumpy old person mindset that I fight all the time to stay fresh and forward thinking. So I have to fight that. But I think that it's funny because I actually looked it up the other day, because I remember it was Barry Cockcroft actually, who all the way back in, when I was doing my PhD thesis, which, that was finished in 2015. So he would have said it maybe in 2013 about how he thought it was really fascinating how YouTube was moving people back to listening to live recordings. So at the time, his point was people used to listen to these curated studio albums with every note fixed, every note perfect, but people are now posting live recordings. So even though they weren't watching it live, they were watching live music. And that was that trend that he was seeing that he thought was really healthy and great for the classical music industry. And so I was looking at that the other day because I was thinking about my own work of going, well, now I'm live streaming. Now I'm wanting to try and do things in one take and post things warts and all. And I recently did a video for one of my students where the reason why I thought of him was they're learning black and blue for their Amy B exam. So I did a recording of that and I mucked up one of the notes. One of the multiphonics was a bit rank. And I was like, I'm not going to edit that out. I'm just going to send it because that was one take. So I think that this acceptance of performers to be contributing and producing live content, warts and all content, is brilliant. Whether that's in person or online, I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know. Like I said, it's too hard for me to go to this cynical place where we're just basically going to be online or nothing. But I'm not that hopeful, but I want it to be that way. But I think, yeah, the push for live is the best thing that I think performers can do out of all of this.
Yeah, I think, people, currently a little bit, apprehensive to go out and about at the moment. But, it's sort of, after the very first lockdown we all had, it was very interesting to sort of see how people are actually very keen to actually go out and actually experience live music and live entertainment. And it just sort of, it's almost like you're sort of going back to 100 years ago, the Roaring 20s, after that whole thing where you had the last pandemic and then people kind of, went from there. But, a couple of hits and like that, as you say, who knows what's going to happen? Yeah,
I mean, it's impossible to predict, but I think if we're focusing on live product and sharing live and sharing that authenticity, and that's something that you're seeing on social media, is this push towards authenticity on social media. So that's one way that it's a drive for change, positive change rather than negative. I think that's great. And if we can be in person, that's brilliant. I don't know, maybe we need to set up our concert halls so that if we can't have audiences, maybe we can still live stream from the concert. Like maybe there's some infrastructure actually that needs to be put into our industry so that performance spaces can operate with or without a live or a physical audience. That might be something that actually probably needs to be looked at. I don't know.
Yeah. All right, cool. Now we have come to the end of the Q&A. And yeah, again, I want to thank you, Emma, Dr. Demarco. Do you mind if I call you Emma? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's just, yeah. Look, again, I want to thank you for your time. Look, if you do have any final questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're just coming up to the final two. But just the second last question, this is always a fun one because I'm always curious to hear what people say with this one, is if you only had 10 minutes to practice, what would it be and why?
Okay, so I actually already know what it's going to be because some days I literally only have 10 minutes to practice. So like I said, advocate for work smarter, not harder. Mm-hmm. So if I only had 10 minutes, it has to be technique, not repertoire at all. And it has to be, the idea is to layer your technique. So I call it my building block strategy. So start with something simple like a scale. I hate long tones. I refuse to practice them in short practice sessions. I pepper them in other things. So no long tones in 10 minutes. It's going to be like a scale. And then you might add some dynamic practice on top of that. You might add some varying articulations. Then you might do it again with some vibrato on certain notes. So make sure you check your vibrato. Then you pop the tuning CD on, check it's in tune. So this idea of 10 minutes should be making sure all your skills are in check and all your skills are being nurtured, because then no matter what sheet music is put in front of you, you've got the chops to play it. So that's my 10 minutes.
Cool. That was very cool. Most people, when I ask that, it's kind of like, oh, you have to think about it. But no, that was very, wow. That was awesome.
I don't know how those people, like some days, I don't know. I just don't have time. I have rehearsals, but I don't have time to sit down and practice. So I just think, I remember someone saying when I was in uni, the most time you ever have to practice is when you're a first year. And I didn't believe it. Now I believe it.
Yep, it's so true. So any undergraduates watching, please practice.
Yes.
And make the most of your time because you'd never have it again. All right. Well, look, Emma, thanks so much for your time. If people are interested in, following what you do, I will be posting links to all your various projects and platforms and all those things in the video once we finish tonight. But in terms of people wanting to know, upcoming gigs, streamed concerts, or anything else you got in the pipeline, what's the best way to sort of keep in the loop?
So the best way is the mailing list on my website, emmademarco.com. Second best would probably be my Instagram as well. And I'm very active on there. That's the best place to contact me for questions. I set aside a time every 2 weeks to do a full clear out of my DMs and answer any and all questions that I get there.
Cool. Nice one. All right. Well, again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Robert. That was a very nice comment there. Robert just said it was very fascinating and inspiring. So there you go.
Thank you, Robert.
So yes, Emma, thank you for your time, and thank you for being our very first guest for 2022.
Yeah.
And we do wish you all the best for the rest of the year and beyond in terms of your projects. Everyone watching, thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. I certainly did, and there's a few things there I took a note of, so I might check some of those later. But if you're interested, please subscribe to the channel. We do try and do a monthly thing. Next month we do have Sydney jazz legend Tim. We have. Is it? No. Do we? Oh, maybe I stuffed that one. Maybe I preempted that one. Did I? No, I didn't. My bad. Next month we have jazz legend, tenor saxophonist extraordinaire Tim Clarkson. That is correct. I had a couple of different Tims on there, so I do apologize. Next month, February, Tim Clarkson. I will be posting a link that will actually be functional this time. So until then, stay safe, and thank you for your time. And thank you, Emma.
Thanks.